Play a little bit of music. Play a little bit of music.
Ana, no huyas de mí, porque Ana, tú eres de mi amor. Si yo nací para amarte a ti, Ana, no huyas de mí, porque Ana, tú eres de mi amor. Y yo nací para amarte a ti, Ana. Eres tu Ana, una dulce ilusión que quiere tener amor. Yo estaré cerca de ti para amarte a ti, Ana.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment.
Echemos abajo la estación de tren, 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 demoler, 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 echemos abajo la estación de tren, demoler, demoler la estación de tren, demoler, demoler la estación de tren. Ta 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 ya ya ya. Me gusta volar estaciones de tren, demoler, 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 demoler. Me gusta volar estaciones de tren, demoler, 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 demoler. Yeah 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 yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to have our author Carribean Fragoza tonight to join us discussing Eat the Mouth That Feeds You with our guest Jordanna Hernandez. First, I'll tell you a little bit about who we have going on today. For anyone who's brand new here, we are Lost City Books, a used, new, and rare bookstore in Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C. We have a close-knit team of some of DC's coolest kids, including myself, I hope. Artists, educators, musicians, writers, and of course, avid readers all coming together to create a unique environment and curate an eclectic selection of books. I am your host for tonight, Shady Rose, and I'm very pleased to be here. Growing up in the peripheries of the greater LA region and outside of Chicano communities of East LA that have largely come to define Chicano identity, including in culture and literature, has shaped Carribean Fragoza's literary approach. Rather than sticking to usual tropes of Chicanx and Latinx writing, she breaks into new thematic territory with unique character voices and perspectives. As a graduate of the Creative Writing MFA program at California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, she pushes the boundaries of Chicanic literature using experimental approaches and devices freely borrowed from international queer and feminist literary movements. She has published fiction and poetry in publications such as Bomb Magazine, Usache, Entropy, Palabra, Literary Magazine, and Emo Hippus. And we're going to learn a lot more about Caribbean today. Jordanna Hernandez is a queer Chicane actor, writer, and educator. She's a company member of 4615 Theater Company and has performed at Ford's Theater, Imagination Stage, Only Theater, and Spooky Action Theater. She tells stories of Chicane culture, of daughters and their mothers, of first-generation Americans' socioeconomic inequality, of mental health, of queerness, of the traumatized, of self-love and healing, and of those yet to be seen. Her mission is to find light within darkness, transform it into art, and heal the world. She enjoys introspective conversations like we're about to have today, tennis, spicy food, and flossing. It's a good combination. About Eat the Mouth That Feeds You. Carribean Fragoza's imperfect characters are drawn within a sympathetic tenderness as they struggle against circumstances and conditions designed to defeat them. A young woman returns home from college only to pick up exactly where she left off. A smart girl in a rundown town with no future. A mother reflects on the pain and pleasures of being inexorably consumed by her small daughter, whose penchant for ingesting grandma's letters has extended to taking bites of her actual flesh. A brother and sister watch anxiously as their distraught mother takes an axe to their old furniture, and then to the backyard fence, until finally she attacks the family's beloved lime tree. Victories are excavated from rubble of personal hardship, and women's wisdom is brutally forged from the violence of history that continues to unfold on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest for tonight. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello.
I'm so pleased to have you both here today. Caribbean especially, I would love to hear some of your perspective on sort of the broader themes of these stories, of this collection of stories, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, and sort of what drove you to collect these pieces together.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you, Shady Rose, for that great introduction. And hi, everybody, friends of Lost City Books. I'm so honored to be here and to share space with you today. And I'll just jump right into the questions. You've already tossed some really great ones out there. Oh, before I forget, thank you to City Lights, my publisher, to Stacy Lewis and Elaine Katzenberger. I always thank them because this book would not have been possible without them and their support. And that's why I'm here today. And also for my family and friends that are supporting me right now. Grandmas are babysitting my two girls, and it's just been a journey for the entire family. So I just wanted to say that. So Eat the Mouth That Feeds You is a collection of 10 stories. So I'll just say a little bit so that folks who haven't read the book can get a sense of what we're talking about today and hopefully be encouraged to buy the book. But it's a collection of 10 short stories that I wrote over the course of many years. I'm not going to say how many, but those of you who know me can do the math and say it's been decades. But what they all have in common is that they're all centered on the experiences of young girls and women of color, particularly Latina, Chicana, Chicanx, Latin, whatever you want to call it, Mexican American, and immigrant women. And I really wanted to have a collection here of transnational stories that take place on both sides of the border and that really are in dialogue with each other. That's to say that just because many of us and our family members have migrated to the US doesn't mean we stop having a relationship with the motherland. So I wanted to make sure that these stories were in conversation with each other in different ways. And I also, those of you who have read my stories or who know me and my writing wanted to make sure that the work was also very centered in the body and the experience of bodies. So when I first started writing these stories, I was an undergraduate at UCLA. That is a kind of body of a young woman by now, years and years later, I am the body of a mother who has given birth to 2 children, to 2 daughters. And it's a whole different experience. And of course, the experience of giving birth is, and gestating and pregnancy and all of that is a whole journey that we can talk more about. But I really wanted to tell stories that were centered in the experience of the female body, at least these female bodies, because there are many different types of female bodies. And I also wanted to make a collection where multiple generations of women could share space together and also have some sort of dialogue across generations. And that's, again, something that I think is really important for daughters of immigrants or children of immigrants to find a way to learn from their previous generations, both what's really useful, like really useful and empowering ancestral knowledge, if possible, but often that's lost, I have to say. So I feel like a need to constantly reach back as far as I can and listen to the stories of previous generations, especially of women, but then also to learn what does not serve us, particularly when we've been raised in patriarchy and in racist cultures as well, because those of us of Latin American descent know that racism is everywhere. That's just like a project of colonialism, and including in Latin America. So how do we, I don't know, become aware of like the patriarchy that we're raised in and the racism that we're raised with as well, and that is ingrained into ourselves? And what do we let go? What do we reject? So these are questions really that I often pose to myself, especially when I sit down to write these stories. And it's an ongoing process. And really, more than finding answers through these stories, I really wanted to create openings for conversation and for thinking through these really difficult, sticky questions that are not just political, because these are questions that are being had like at the macro level, like even policy level, but also like on the really personal level, within our own families and even within our own selves personally. Like, how do these questions and struggles against patriarchy and racism and other isms, like really, and homophobism, of course, like play out in our own bodies on a daily basis? So there was a lot of stuff that I was really, I don't know, just trying to think about, and again, not arrive necessarily to a hard answer to, but just create a lot of openings for more questions and for thinking about new ways of being as women, as girls, as femmes, as like non-binary bodies. So those are a lot of the things that I was really thinking through. I don't know if Shady Rose or Jordanna want to jump in at this point, or if you guys would prefer for me to start reading. It's your call.
I mean, I'll just say that I've definitely, everything that you said right now, I mean, I am also first generation. My parents are from Mexico. And so something that you said that resonated with me, just the always wanting to connect back to the motherland and telling the stories of our ancestors and our grandparents and their grandparents. And a lot of that, I do find that there's that disconnect. So having read this and just hearing you talk right now about the themes that I just, read throughout the whole book and the bodily connection, it really does come through it. And I felt it viscerally as well. It's so familiar, from the music, the food, the sounds. It's all very, sensory. So I just can't wait to hear what the excerpt that you read.
Yeah. So what I'm going to read today is actually a story that I just realized that I have not read once during my entire virtual book tour. And I don't know why. This is a story that is near and dear to my heart, but I guess I just often want to read stories that I know people really, really like the hits. But this is like a B-side, maybe, that is just, like I said, dear to me. And it's called Me Muero. And without saying too much about it, it's about a girl who dies, a young woman who dies at a family party, but is still conscious. There's still an awareness about her, and her body is still animated in different ways. So she is technically dead at a family party, and she navigates through her family dynamics in this dead body. So again, this story is called Me Muero, and here's my beautiful book that I just can't stop admiring because of this beautiful girl. And I'll talk more about the cover if there's time to do that, because there's a short, nice story about that. Me Muero, here we go. Everyone's moment comes eventually. In my case, my moment is now, right now. The separation is taking place. I'm peeling back from myself. This tension I feel tugging between the two is my fear. I could make this very difficult for myself, or I could just let go. I choose to not fear the inevitable, and I feel the tension dissolve. It melts away smoothly, and I peel away gently. I let go of the last points of connection without a bit of grief. That's it. Once you get past the hard part, dying is not difficult at all. I lie here alone on the cement floor of the patio, the same as before, though everything is different now. This is my body, and this is me. I'd timed it just right when I found myself alone out on the patio. Before long, one by one, a few of my cousins had begun to walk over to take a look at my body before retreating back into the house. The kids whispered too loudly to be discreet, all in a bunch at the door, inquiring from the threshold. They shoved one another to see my body. Finally, an uncle approached me, crouching down to touch my wrist, my neck. I watched him as he inspected my face, looking into my vacant eyes, squinting a little, like peering through the tinted windows of a parked car. He turned back to the inquisitive crowd inside and shook his head. They understood. Now that the wait was over, they dispersed, everyone back to the respective business of food, talk, and play. One or two at a time, they stepped into the patio's quietude and leaned over ever so slightly to bear witness to the fact that I was truly dead. Only their shadows touched me. By now, my mother must know I am dead too. I decide to get up out of my body. I know there are things that need doing. I can't just go away, not yet. I leave my body there on the ground to go and find out what there is to be done. My aunts, uncles, and cousins are circulating in the house. I feel my family shifting, moving like weather over the earth. The rumbling of busy tias loaded down with thick bodies and domestic duties. The reign of young children in chase. The uncles, mountains that won't lift a finger here except when drunk to dance or fight. I make my way through the house looking for cousins who don't seem to notice me as I brush past them in the hallway, nor do my aunts when I walk into the kitchen where they are sorting out pans and dishes. No one sees me or hears me. I sigh, I hum, I clear my throat, I utter sounds, but no one responds. I find my mom listening to some tias gossiping in the living room. Mommy? But she doesn't hear me. Ma. She looks somber, but I can tell she's just trying to be polite and sociable with my tias by appearing to at least listen to them. Mama. She turns and stares through me to the back door. I don't know what to do. I touch her arm, her face, but she does not respond. I hadn't really considered this before. So consumed was I with the busy, painful undertaking of dying. But now I wonder, suddenly panicked, what if I can't talk to my mother ever again? Or my siblings? Or my father? What if I can't talk to anyone ever again? I don't know what is going to happen to me after my body's gone. or what I'll do, or for how much time. For once, for the flash of an instant, the prospect of this new solitude frightens me. By the time I return to the patio, a loose circle of men has gathered around my body. My uncles, cousins, and their friends stand around it, chatting and sipping on their Cokes and Budweisers. Occasionally, they glance down at my body while they talk soccer matches and Teamster gossip. I hear the voices of the women inside the house getting loud, laughing and shouting as they prepare food for the children and the men. It would be a lot warmer in the kitchen if the kids didn't leave the door open every time they ran in and out of the house. The women flip tortillas on the hot grill and stir spoons into sauces and stews. They take turns going outside, carrying steaming bowls and small baskets of hot tortillas to the husbands and the sons who are still talking about soccer. Beside them, my body is still lying there on the white cement. Everyone is careful not to step over it. I don't mind that my body is lying there. The concrete is flat and dry, mostly smooth and dotted with many tiny holes where the wet cement air bubbles used to be. The day is overcast in that Southern California way. The sky colorless with the sunlight diffused through a thin cloud cover. Fortunately, the heat has been kept at bay, which is a good thing for my fully exposed body. But the most important thing is that the ground is very clean. My aunts sweep the patio thoroughly and often. Only a few flower buds and leaves from the avocado tree litter the ground. No dirt or insects to disturb me. I'm gonna read just a little more and then I'll take a pause. Despite having never been dead before, not even having had an out-of-body experience as some living people claim, I have a feeling that if I tried, I could figure out how to make my family members hear, see, and feel me. This was hard enough when I was alive, but certainly it requires new strategies now. I leave my body again and go back into the house. I say, hey, to my cousin Cristina, who happens to be walking by, just to see what happens. Nothing happens. She keeps walking without acknowledging me. Then I see my cousin Danny walking toward me, so I decide to try speaking more loudly. I say, hey, and he pauses, turns around like he thought he heard someone call his name. I get right in front of his face and take a good look at his eyes, buried under the dense bar of his brow. The bones in his face have thickened considerably since I last remember him, when he was a chubby boy, crowned and golden curls. We were born only a month apart and raised together all our lives. But it's only now that I really notice he has become a man. I look more closely, and there, I see it. He's still the same Danny. But my cousin doesn't see me and continues on his way. It's really not very different from being alive, actually. I see it happen all the time. Someone will say something, but no one will hear them, mostly because they didn't really believe anyone would in the first place. They are startled when someone happens to catch what they said. I want someone to hear me. The house is full of cousins and I pick one. I see my cousin Alex and I walk toward him and I say, hey, Alex. He turns around and looks at me and says, oh, hey, what's up, cuz? I smile at him and shake my head. Nothing, I say quietly now, relieved. Mommy? I find my mother again. She is watching over the toddlers as they ramble around the living room. Mama? Mija, she responds, looking relieved to see me. ¿Dónde andas? Buscándote y esperando terminar esto. Mami, no has salido a ver mi cuerpo. ¿Para qué, mija? Eso es lo de menos. Es el puro cascarón. Es cierto, tienes razón, pero tengo que atenderlo hasta que termine. Mija, solo tú sabes cómo hacer estas cosas, cómo se debe hacer. En esto no te puedo ayudar mucho. Pues poco a poco voy viendo cómo y aprendiendo. I know she knows it's not necessary to come outside to see me because that part of me will be taken care of. It is not really the part that matters the most to either of us. I know she knows I will deal with it appropriately, and she's letting me do as I see fit. I'm no longer afraid. I want to lie in my body again for a while and be still for a bit to think. I don't want to sit on the couch in the living room next to the kids playing Xbox, or at the breakfast bar in the kitchen near the women, my aunt's tireless chatter and the noise of the kitchen equipment. I go back outside to where the men are standing around my body, more empty beer cans set on the ground. I lie down in it again without disturbing their conversation. It feels like when I was a very little girl and I'd sit in a huge cardboard box playing house by myself, with just enough privacy to unfold my quiet musings. But now, resting here inside my body, it's like I'm lying in a shoebox without a lid or at the bottom of a canoe, watching the clouds drift above. I see some black wires cutting across the sky. Some pigeons clean and fluff their feathers. So I'll just pause right there. There's a lot more, so I hope you all get a chance to read the rest of the story. Just give me a second, I have to do something.
Well, thank you so much for that reading. That was an exquisite insight, I think, into the style of your stories.
Yeah.
And
And this one in particular, I felt was so beautifully gory. Just imagining the way that her body is decomposing, like in front of everyone, but yet she's still having this very intimate moment with herself and her mom too. It's the very that close bondness. I feel like her mother's the only one that's truly seeing her there in the hustle and bustle of the family life and the cooking and the tias and yeah, this was. I'm curious to know this one in particular. Did you know that you were going to end with this story?
No, I was having a really hard time on my own trying to figure out what order the stories should go in. But with the help of my editor, Elaine Katzenberger, we figured it out, and it seemed to make sense to end it with me muero, which is kind of like a dramatic way of saying like I die, and then it ends, and then the book ends. So I don't know. I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I feel like it's very symbolic to just the release of all of the struggles that we've just read throughout the whole entire book. One thing that I noticed throughout is just, when I finished, I kept thinking to myself, I feel like I was outside for most of the book. And I was thinking like what was your relationship to nature and how that tied into these stories? Because it's very, in this particular excerpt, even you talked about, the rumbling of busy tias, the rain of children, and the uncle, the mountains, and sort of the parallels of the roles that exist in our family life and our culture and what our aunts and uncles and all that represent versus, the children. So how did nature play into all of that?
Yeah, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, which is basically where I still am again right now. But we have the San Gabriel Mountains. And so we live in this like flat area with these big mountains up in the north area. And I just always oriented myself by these mountains. And I just kind of felt like just almost like on a platform or like something that was being offered to nature and to the heavens. And I also grew up near what is called Whittier Narrows Parks, which are the largest parks in LA County, basically. And so that experience of going to those parks and going to the river, we have the San Gabriel River also cutting through El Monte and South El Monte, where I'm from. And I always felt a strong connection to that place. So there's that. And then I was also really strongly influenced by Juan Rulfo's stories and Pedro Páramo, El Llano en Llamas. And so there's a lot of references to nature, because the characters in his stories are very connected. They're characters that are rural. They grow up on farms, they live in farms, and they have these really strong connections to the land. And Juan Rulfo happens to be from the same state region that my family's from. My family's from Jalisco. And so I think that even though I didn't grow up like on a farm and I don't have that rural experience, I'm much more of a suburban person. Through language, a lot of those natural references, like references to nature, carry through in dichos and sayings and sensibilities. So I think nature comes in these different ways as well. And I really like what you said, that it felt like you were outdoors a lot while reading this. I really like that.
Yeah, it didn't hit me until the very end. I had to look back on it. So it was really lovely.
Can I say one more thing before I forget? Also, I'm really interested in putting the bodies of women like outside of the immediate like enclosed domestic space. I feel like women, especially like Latinas or Mexican women, are expected to be in the home so much. And I always want to know more about what happens when you take the body of a woman, the woman herself or the person, outside the house. And what is that like to just be out in the world, like exposed to sunlight and to all the elements? And so that's something that I just want more of. I don't know, I have a craving for that, like just being out as a woman.
Yeah. I definitely saw a lot of examples of just women living outside of their, motherly roles and being able to live in the full humanness that they are. I also wanted to, talk a little bit about just, I guess, how your process and how you determined, how much of this are your personal memories or, things that you've heard, how much you actually, if you spoke to people and did some research to really fill the stories, because a lot of these, I mean, there is no one Chicana like way of living. And so I myself found things here that were very new to me. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious to hear, more about your experiences.
Yeah, so definitely some of the stories have personal elements, like this one in particular, Me Muero. I like literally name real cousins or real tias in my life. So part of that comes from wanting to experience like the life or the reality that I'm familiar with, but also by putting some totally extraordinary, fantastical, wild element into it. So while certain things are very real, like certain people or places, my tia's house or whatever are real, I've never died in any way. So I just wanted to sort of see as an experiment, like what would it be like if I bring in this sort of crazy, like fantastic thing into something that's totally ordinary, and how does that interrupt things? And then like, what do I even learn from that? So I like doing experiments like that in my work. And then there's other things, other stories that are inspired by things that I've heard or stories told by actual women. Like one of the stories that I wrote was inspired by my time working as a food server at UCLA, which is where I went to undergrad. That was like my work study job. I served lasagna at a school dorm, and I was the only student, and everybody around me was like a mom, a señora, like a lot of immigrant women there. And so I really felt at home and like nurtured by them when I felt so like removed from my family. And I really cherished their stories, especially because they were so like generous and just blunt and honest. where sometimes the women in my family are a lot more protective, maybe because they know me, but these ladies, they didn't care. They just spilled it. They just gave it all. So I was thankful for that and like really inspired too.
That's so awesome. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're talking about this introducing the fantastical aspect of it, and I love that because it just kind of turned it on its head and added a whole new element. Like the way that the Saulo Gigante one ended blew my mind because it was so real and so ingrained in my memory of watching Saulo Gigante, which is, you know, just like a very big like show that everyone, I think every Chicano Latino watched at some point, all encompassing of music and dance and games. Oh my gosh, everything. And so just seeing how you just completely made it something entirely different and challenged it because, you know, um, what was his name? I just Don Francisco is like kind of a little, it's problematic. But yeah, that, how did those elements of fantastical realism, how did those elements come to you when a lot of these stories are grounded in such real truth stories?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I try, and I do even without trying now, like just try to look at everything in life that way, like just looking at ordinary objects, ordinary things in life, and then just trying to like shift my perspective a little, just distort it, just skew it a little, and then see what happens. Because even some of my stories that are like Vicious Ladies, like perfectly realistic, but just like 1 or 2 dimensions off, just or like degrees off, just something slightly twisted. And then I want to see what happens when I do that. And then some of them, like Inifati, are just like a little dead girl, like a little child martyr saint, virgin, like decides to help a living girl, like kill her father.
Right. Doesn't even believe
That's just
God.
like wild. What was that?
And challenges the belief of God. She's a saint, but is like, I don't know, God, I don't know anything about God. I'm a saint, but I wasn't included in that.
Yeah, I didn't get the memo. Like,
Yeah.
nobody CC'd me on that God conversation. Yeah, and I realized, like, in having these conversations, like with you today and others, that I was really, I guess I just remembered that I was really influenced by Interview with the Vampire and like vampire stories. And I've always been fascinated by like these gory, like fantastic stories. Again, like the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. I've had like this lingering obsession with like werewolves and zombies. I have like a zombie novel that I haven't finished writing, but it's there in the back burner. So anyway, it's just like, I don't know, just like, I think there's a lot of emotional material like jammed into the fantastical and into the magical. And I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why people write and why people read, because we want to have a meaningful emotional experience. Like fiction and art are not just these abstract, like intellectual exercises. And if they are, and that's your thing, that's okay. But like for many of us, like we really want to have meaningful connections in which our emotional selves are also part of the experience. And I feel like the magical can really, it just holds, it's like horror and magical realism and fabulism, like I always have like very emotional reactions to that, and I think they're good vessels for my own like emotional life. Plus I can dump a lot of my more brainy kinds of questions into it and then create this like Franken story situation. I don't know what they are, but I just find that it works for me.
Yeah, it's very theatrical too. I mean, that's a kind of theater that I love watching. So when I was reading this, I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly the style that I've loved. And just being able to read it in a series of short stories is like its own little mini play each time, with just how visual it is. You know, and one of the things that I wanted to bring up too is this idea of, you know, you'd mentioned, or in your bio mentioned, wanting to stray away from the typical tropes of what is written around Chicano culture. And there's this one theme that throughout that I think of, not only in the book, but in my life and with my parents and my family. And it's this idea of sacrifice and what that means. And I see it a lot throughout all these stories, particularly, you know, with especially with Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, which, you know, I'm curious to hear more about the picture of the book. But how were you able to incorporate, you know, telling these stories that didn't fall into these usual tropes, and particularly around the theme of sacrifice, where usually it means compromising oneself and one's own needs. And was that something that, you know, how did you thread that throughout?
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. It's complicated. I mean, there are tropes that are easy to reject, especially if I take on like a more feminist perspective. And you know, there are tropes, like you said, in sacrifice, such as sacrifice, that are common in Latino, Latinx, Chicano, Chicanx literature. But I just wanted to sort of interrogate that more. I wanted to push on that. For one, I find that to be like a very Catholic way of looking at the world and like living it. Like you have to sacrifice yourself, and even if you're miserable, even if it hurts, like physically and emotionally, like you sacrifice yourself for the family, for the church, for community, or whatever. And I wanted to push against that because I don't believe that really serves us all the time. Many times I think it does not. And so I guess I'm trying to like reevaluate for myself as a person and as an artist and as a person who identifies as part of the Chicanx, Latinx community. Like, what does my sacrifice look like? Or is there another way of being part of a family, being part of a community that is still giving and is still generous, but is not going about it through a place of sacrifice necessarily that implies like pain or just giving yourself up? Because as we know, like in patriarchy, like women give themselves up all the time, like to their husbands, because this is what we're taught. This is what is ingrained to us, to our children, to our family. And like men don't do that. They don't, you know, like it's just not the same thing. It's not even across the board. And so anyway, I guess I'm just trying to like think about all of these things and reevaluate and figure out what to reject and what to keep, and see what serves me as a person and what can serve like the larger community. So I don't know, those are like things that I'm definitely thinking about through this story collection.
Yeah. And it comes through too. I mean, this whole idea of just, you know, you have in Vicious Ladies, she leaves, she decides she doesn't want to do this anymore. And so she sets her boundaries, even if it costs her more at the end, and compromises her sense of being, but knowing that it's not healthy for her. And even in, you know, Lumberjack Mom, just starting with that one I thought that was just, I mean, what the lemon or the lime tree represents, and her destroying it, and knowing that her children, like that's their tree, even if it's not producing anything. and just the image of her destroying that, and not necessarily it being about destroying any wood, but like leading up to that particular tree. yeah, I saw all of that, you know, the friction, the tension between wanting to nod to those cultural expectations, but also understanding that we are creating a whole new way of living that puts us first, so that then later on we can, you know, we're not creating more trauma cycles and pushing cultural trauma along to our kids. So that's
Exactly.
awesome. I saw that all throughout. So thank you.
Yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. And I'll take it 1 second really quick. I know we're on a roll. This is a great conversation. Uh, to remind our viewers that if you have questions for the author or for Jordanna, you can leave a comment right at the bottom of this video, and we'll get to your questions towards the end of the live stream. But my question for you, Caribbean, and for both of you to discuss is how these elements of fantastic realism and of magic, of surreal experiences, um, kind of map on to the wildness of sort of feminine release, because I feel like that is also a continuous theme in a lot of the stories. Just releasing the expectations, releasing your this mortal coil, if you will,
Mhm.
releasing, a lot of different pressures or bonds on the body and on the spirit. And I'd love to hear about sort of more of those connections as well.
Yeah, definitely the release of expectations is important. And again, I find that by introducing the magical or the surreal or the fantastical really just loosens things up for me, at least. I don't know how it works for other writers, but for me, it just does allow me to, I don't know, it just gives me a lot of permission and a lot of space to be as wild as I feel like I need to be, or as wild as my characters need to be. And then also, as I was listening to you, Shady Rose, I was thinking about like appetite, like female appetite and desire, and to consume like food, of course, but then like all the other appetites that we have, like to try things like with our bodies, again, like a very embodied experience, like sexually. And then, like I was saying earlier to Jordanna, like just to see what your body feels like in these different environments, and what kinds of possibilities does that produce. And so yeah, Shiri Rose, I do feel like introducing the magical or the surreal or whatever, like they I don't know, they offer opportunities, they create like new spaces that maybe we couldn't have, or I couldn't like imagine just operating in the normal like realm of life that we are forced to exist in. Like it just kind of opens things up and allows us to travel in different directions. And some people do it through mushrooms or other hallucinogens. Not to say I haven't tried those, but fiction is a way to travel to other alternate planes as well.
Yeah. I would have to agree. I mean, I have much else to add. I think when being able to introduce realism or fantastical realism into the world, it just really liberates, I think, me in particular. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and being able to explore what new realities I can create, and hopefully in living in those realities in my mind, living them, embodying them, I can then transfer them over to my daily living and breathe that and influence that, and hopefully spread some of that very open and free fluid expression, and hoping that it resonates and it makes, if it can make someone else feel comfortable, then that's really like the goal, just to get people to be able to be themselves and live their love.
Yeah. But then also I like making people feel uncomfortable. And I have heard, especially dudes have felt like really uncomfortable with some of the stories. And that gives me like a strange pleasure, like to make them uncomfortable. So just want to say that.
Yes, challenge them.
I think that what you just said is a really good point. As a writer and an artist performer myself as well, I think challenging the comfort of the comfortable is like a key element to breaking open these social systems, or even cultural systems that we currently abide by. Um, so I'm fascinated always by work such as yours that accomplishes that in such a just a stirring way is the best way I can describe your prose. I would like to hear a little bit too more about your the voice that comes forth from you as you're writing, the voice of the characters, and also the voices maybe that you feel are channeling through you as you write um, these characters, and also other things that you've written.
Yeah, there are voices that I definitely channel, and they're not always voices that I know. Like they're not always a person that I worked with or a family member. I think more and more, they're voices that arrive to me through, I don't know where. I mean, we could really try to analyze that and dissect it, but usually what happens to me is I'm working on something that has nothing to do with fiction or anything that I'm working on, and it'll be like a little voice that feels like it's coming from a really deep place, and maybe that deep place belongs to me or it belongs to the universe. I don't know what it is, but it just comes and I hear it very distinctly, and then I'll write it down. And some folks have heard me say this before, but I'll write it down, and it feels like a living thing, like its own entity when I put it down on the page. And then I come back to it because usually I'm in the middle of something that I have to get done, or I'm on a deadline. And then I'll come back to it and I'll read it again. And if it still feels like it's a living thing, like it's its own entity, then I know I have a story there. I don't always know what the story is, but it's something that needs to be uh, helped along. It needs to grow on the page. So yeah, sometimes it does feel like I'm channeling by listening, and sometimes I'm channeling by no intention of my own, like it just kind of comes out.
And Jordanna, as a performer, I'm sure that you too experience moments of channeling. And I wonder if, as you were reading this book, did you sense any sort of similarities to characters, or to thoughts or feelings, etc., that you have sort of channeled through your performing, through your acting as well?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of the biggest things, and kind of tying back to what we were discussing earlier about desire, all these characters want something, and they're having to navigate what that is, and that's the undercurrent of how they carry themselves in space and how they interact with the people around them. And I feel like each of these characters have a very specific thing, very specific circumstances that have to be taken into consideration, and desires that influence their actions. And it leads to like characters leaving their husbands, or protecting their children, and wanting, fantasizing about like their father disappearing. It's just, and all of that is a part of character building as well. And how is it that then your desires will create relationships with those people around you, and how it'll influence them, and how it'll interact with their desires as well, because the other characters here, not even just the voice that is speaking through the stories, also is wanting something out of this main voice. So totally, it's something that I can feel, that living entity that is carried throughout.
Absolutely. We have a few more moments here, a few more minutes. So I'll encourage our audience, our viewers again, to not be shy and go ahead and leave a comment if you have a question for our author. But in the meantime, I would love to hear a little bit more about the setting of the book, and to discuss the place and the because we talked a little bit about the feeling of outdoors and being um, in that way, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, Caribbean, on the settings of the stories and
Yeah.
how that
Yeah,
place.
setting is really important to me, and something that I always say, and I'll say it again because I really believe in it, is that I think setting is not just like a backdrop that is interchangeable, or it doesn't matter what's going on in the background because it's all about the characters. I feel like the characters are really intertwined with the world that they exist in, because they're really struggling with it in so many different ways. And So I almost see setting, and I'm sure other writers have said this also, but I really do see setting as a kind of character that uh, that is changing, that is not static, that progresses or shifts as we go along. And I think we see that in a couple of the stories. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of Ini Fati, the one about the two little girls, and they're playing out. The whole story basically takes place outside in the vacant lot, and it's full of rocks and weeds and rodents and stuff like that. But there's also like weather, and there's like, I don't know, I guess I was thinking a lot about, I was living in Fresno at the time, which I didn't know when I first moved there is insanely hot in the summers. Like it feels like the weather is like a real thing that you have to seriously like deal with like on a daily basis. And I wanted the weather and the landscape to really shape or have some sort of involvement in how the story progressed or evolved or devolved. So anyway, again, like the story is very much woven in with the landscape of the place. And that's something that I think about a lot every time I write, not just fiction, but also I write a lot of nonfiction and I do journalism. And I always find it very important to understand context, like the physical landscape of the place, but also historical context. And I think I had a lot of those things in mind when I was writing about when I was writing Ini Fati, because there's a little bit of time travel that happens and we learn about Ini's life like centuries ago. So anyway, setting is for me like very, very important.
Thank you. Yeah. I have a question from one of our audience members here, which says, how does bodily autonomy or lack thereof influence your characters and their experiences?
That's bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
How does bodily autonomy? Wow, I feel like a lot of my characters don't feel like they really have autonomy. And they're struggling to find that or to understand what that even means, because as a young person, I don't know, I feel like it's a real process to understand what it means to be you and how you define yourself separately from the people around you, mainly your family. And so particularly for women and girls, that's like a real serious like struggle. I mean, at least it has been for myself, and especially as a young person, just trying to find out what it meant to be like an autonomous body that takes care of itself, that does things for itself, for myself, rather than for other people. And I don't know, it's not easy. I know I've gotten myself into trouble, but I feel like I turned out okay for the most part. But yeah, bodily autonomy is like, I don't know, like it almost feels dangerous sometimes, especially if you're raised like Catholic, like, I don't know, just patriarchy again, like there's danger there in trying to figure that out. And then also like exposing yourself to the world. I know there was a time in my life that in my early 20s that I really tried to dress like a guy. not just because it was comfortable, but because I felt like my body was very endangered by being out in the city alone. But I wanted to experience the city of LA. I wanted to be out in the night. I wanted to be on public transit. I wanted to go to areas that were kind of scary. Not just because of this adventurous spirit that was kind of driving me along, but also because I just wanted to feel that. And it felt dangerous, and it was dangerous, and it's more dangerous now that I think about it. Now that I'm way older and I'm a mom, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how I got through all those things. But yeah, bodily autonomy is, yeah, it's intense and important.
I love what you said there about not even just because of a sense of adventure, but because you just want to experience that. Um, and it reminds me so much of, the danger that the feminine body is always in, and how it often prevents us from what is our right as human beings to live the full life experience of life. Um, so thank you for that. I do have another question from our audience, and I promise I won't be keeping you all night. But let's see. Karina says, do you think that the live voices of characters or these live entities can manifest in the dreams of a writer?
Yes. Gosh, I have a very active dream life. And I actually, for my experience, I feel like the dream life spills into my real life. But yeah, I guess it goes both ways. So the story that I just read, Me Muero, was actually like a full-on dream that I just like woke up and wrote down. And I've edited it since, but it was essentially a dream that I had. And it was just so alive and so real, but also so like liberating. That release was so intense for me that I felt like I had to capture that. Like that was a big lesson for me that I received from my dream, and I had to capture it in the story. So I take my dreams very seriously, and I don't go to dream dictionaries necessarily to try to figure out what they mean, but emotionally and just like certain dynamics and even landscapes, bringing it back to settings like that live in my dreamscape, I carry with me into my normal world, my wake world. And sometimes it goes back. So that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, like I know for some people, like their dream life is not really a thing they engage with, but for me, it's so powerful that I do.
That's awesome. I have to ask because I know we're running out of time, but can you tell us about the cover of the book and its image?
Yes. So this cover image is it's called Chalmita, I think, and it's photographed by Graciela Iturbide, who happens to be one of my favorite photographers of all time. She's a Mexicana, Graciela Iturbide. She was trained by Manuel Alvarez Bravo, who was like this iconic, amazing Mexican photographer. And her images have influenced me since before most of these stories existed. And mainly because of her portrayal of women. She has this fantastic series of like cholas, of like these women in Boyle Heights. And I just thought they were so exquisite because they were intimate portraits of these like essentially gang members, but nursing their babies or resting on a bed or looking in the mirror, putting on eyeliner. And I just thought it was so moving, just so beautiful. And then really influential for me were her series of photographs of the women of Juchitán in Oaxaca. So it's a matriarchal society in Oaxaca. And I just found that like, whoa, like to be so mind-blowing, because it was just like a completely alternate way of living. And I did get the opportunity to visit once and to witness this myself. And I just thought, oh my God, another life is possible. Like, I love Jalisco, I love my family and my culture, but we gotta mix this up. And I felt like they were really offering or not really offering, they're just living their life, like a good one that I thought I could really try to model my own after. And so Graciela Iturbide was like my entry point to the lives of many different women in these really beautiful photographs. So when just quick story, but like my editor, Elaine Katzenberger, and I were talking about cover images and what ideas we had. And I thought, just like in this dreamy kind of way, like, wouldn't it be nice if we could have an image of Graciela Iturbide on the cover? And then she said, well, why don't we email her? And then she emailed her, and then she said yes. So that was just like miraculous. It was just so fantastic. And my editor is like the best, and a magician and all the great things. So we were able to get this cover with this image on it. So yeah, that's the little story about how this cover came to be.
That's brilliant. That's so wonderful. I love it when different strains come together and it just clicks in that wonderful way. So we are running out of a time right now, but I would love to, if you have any closing statements for our viewers, or if you'd like to tell them where they can find more of you, now would be a great time.
Yeah. So you can find a lot of me on the internet probably, but thank you everybody who's joined us today. And I know some of you have joined along during the duration of this book tour. So thank you for joining again today. Yeah, so I have this collection of short fiction. I also have East of East, which is a collection of, it's called East of East, The Making of Greater El Monte, which is about my hometown in El Monte and South El Monte. And it's a collection of essays that I edited with my husband, Romeo Guzman. So we're the editors, along with Ryan Reft and Alex Cummings. And so I do a lot of nonfiction, and I do arts and cultural journalism as well. So I recently started my Vicious Ladies online publication of cultural criticism by women and non-binary folks of color. This is like my project, so it's slowly coming along, but I feel very proud of it. And I'm glad it's summer because I can return to it again. But that's called Vicious Ladies, and it is named after Vicious Ladies, the short story. And just FYI, those of you who haven't heard the story, Vicious Ladies was the name of an actual party crew, all-girl party crew, based in Boyle Heights and out here in LA. And just little tiny backstory. I know we're running out of time, but Vicious Ladies, I first learned about them because I read an article in the LA Weekly about the death of a young woman, a teenager, who was in a party crew called the Vicious Ladies. And what had happened was that she was part of this party crew that was really dedicated to protecting women in the party scene, because it was an underground party scene and a dangerous place for young women. But this girl had sort of strayed away from her crew. She was hanging out with this boy from another crew, and she was basically unprotected. That other crew did not look after her. Her own boy didn't look after her, and she was killed, and she was found murdered in a dumpster in Boyle Heights. And so there was a really fascinating interview with the leader of this Vicious Ladies party crew, and she really broke down why she had created this crew and why it was important to protect each other as women, because the men are not going to protect us. They're going to endanger us. And so I was just so blown away by her voice and her clarity and her strength. And in some ways, important ways, she did influence my character Samira in Vicious Ladies. So this goes back to some of the research or like real life things that make their way into my short story. But Vicious Ladies is that. It's about, I mean, the crew was about creating a safe space for girls and women. And Vicious Ladies, my online publication, is really about creating space for writers to find their own voice outside of the male or the white gaze. And I'm really committed to not just developing my own voice as a writer outside of the gaze, but trying to offer some guidance or any kind of support that I can offer to upcoming younger writers, and just trying to create like a supportive space for writers of color, particularly women and non-conforming folks. So that's it. That's my little spiel about all my things that I do.
That's
And
so
for
awesome.
me, you can just find me on my website, also online. It's JordanaHernandez.com. I have a few upcoming projects, but most of it is theater and film. So at some point, I also am planning to hopefully start workshopping some of my writing as well. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, usually through my the company 4615 Theater that I'm a company member of. They're really awesome. So y'all should check them out.
Absolutely brilliant. You two have been so wonderful as guests. I'm so glad that we had this conversation and we got some more insights into Eat the Mouth That Feeds You. For those of you watching, if you haven't got your copy yet, we do still have some at Lost City Books. So you can go ahead and either visit us at our store on 18th Street in Adams Morgan, or you can hop onto our website and find the book there and we will ship it to you. Thank you both again so much. This has been wonderful. I hope that we can stay in touch and that you both have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Shady Rose. Thank you, Jordanna. This has been a great afternoon.